Europe has gone through periods of decline, war and rejuvenation. The Renaissance, the Enlightenment. Has Europe finally realised its responsibilities? We are at a decisive moment in European history. Join me, Darasz, for How We Got Here.
The French Revolution, sparked by a massive debt, financially overburdened commoners, abused by the clergy and nobility, and food shortages, bathed the streets of Paris and the plains of Vendée in the blood of the privileged ones. Driven by the Marxist ideology, the Bolshevik Revolution offered an end to World War I, redistribution of land to peasants, and worker control of factories. It too saw its opponents arrested, executed, or exiled. Trump's revolution of common sense has shared similarities with both of the revolutions. While no blood was shed, Trump's revolution has seen heavy restructuring of the government through the elevation of his loyal supporters like Elon Musk to positions of significant power and the trimming of governmental positions via the Department of Government Efficiency, itself not an official government department. Having found itself under Trump's tariff hammer and in the shadow of China's competitiveness, the European Union is at a crossroads. One of Trump's tariffs is the 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum imports, effective from early March.
Unjustified tariffs on the European Union will not go unanswered.
According to the Atlantic Council's Jacopo Pastorelli, the EU could decrease its 10% import taxes on US vehicles. The bloc could also purchase more US LNG, agricultural products, and US-made defense equipment is also an option. If it fails, the EU should reinstate suspended tariffs on US steel and aluminum, and also slap tariffs on Tesla or Starlink to irk Trump's billionaire advisor Elon Musk. For the first time, the EU could release the kraken of its anti-coercion instrument. This tool allows for imposing higher customs duties and export controls, limiting or freezing intellectual property rights, putting a ban on services or applying duties to digital platforms such as streaming services, and enforcing investment restrictions and limits on foreign direct investment. Perhaps this kind of response would put Trump's revolution in the stage all revolutions go through, the devouring of its own children.
Secret Service is worried about that.
I'm delighted to be joined today by Korewa, the Director of the Warsaw Office of the Atlantic Council. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you so much for having me.
Short question, what is the point of the EU in 2025?
Well, the point, I think, is what it has always been, is to get a Europe that's whole, free and at peace. I mean, we've come a long way, of course. It's an amazing thing, really, if you think about it, a continent that's been tearing itself apart for hundreds of years with these massive wars that dragged down all the rest of the world and so on and so on. We know the story, but the fact that this is now unthinkable in most of the continent, unfortunately, there is a war waging in the continent right now in Ukraine, the worst one since the end of World War II, and we're still not there of bringing all of Europe together into a community that is whole, free, and at peace. And it's not just for Ukraine. I mean, we still have Belarus, which is a dictatorship. We still have countries that are under, problematic in many ways and have issues. The Western Balkans still has that. All those things have not been solved yet. So there are plenty of missions for Europe to do.
So the old fault lines are still there?
In some,
East-West?
Some ways. I mean, we are in Poland, of course, which is here's an example of a country that's done the transition, but not everyone has, and there are different reasons for it. But yes, there are dividing lines, of course, but we're perfectly capable of erasing those legacies of the Iron Curtain. It's still there, but we can still do more.
The history of Europe also is the history of empires. We have one or two dominant powers on the continent, and Britain, of course, has this pivotal role to play in maintaining the balance of power, all that sort of stuff. Is that still relevant? Is that thinking still relevant in among the European thinking classes, or have we gone to this rather soft EU style of perpetual discussion, perpetual dithering almost? How do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something to be said for the fact that there's a reaction, right, to the old way of doing things. We understood that the old system of great powers having quote unquote spheres of influence, which some people today seem to think is some sort of great solution. It's actually not. That kind of system is inherently unstable for very simple reasons. Most great powers are not happy with the sphere of influence that other great powers are willing to give them, one. And two, often countries who end up in the sphere of influence of one or the other great power are not happy about that. And we saw that crashing down into world wars. Now, of course, you don't want to overcorrect for it insofar that you don't want to create a system where dithering and talking is an end in itself, because of course it's not. And you don't also do not want to create a system where geopolitics is sort of an ugly word. Sometimes when I talk to people in the European Union, they seem to think that way. Like, well, you know, everybody wants to be, our soft power is so great that everyone wants to be part of this EU market. And it's like, well, what if they don't? What do you do? Right?
How did that way of thinking, that this soft power converting the world into an kind of extended EU almost, how did that come about? Was this a post-World War II Western European kind of...
it's, again, there's a good reason for why we tried, and of course after the Cold War as well, right? I mean, there were plenty of people who thought that this is, it's done essentially. Like, it's not done, but I mean, Russia is not going to, obviously, Russia.
End of history, kind of thing.
End of history, although that's misunderstood. Yes. I mean, that is widely misunderstood. Actually, most people should just read the last page of that book. It just kind of explains actually pretty well of why we are where we are. But yeah, no, of course, that obviously Russia is not going to, there's that famous quote by John Kerry when he was Secretary of State. It's like, well, you just don't just invade countries like that. You don't do that in the 21st century. And it's like, says who? Like what? Because it's convenient for us, because we say it's the 21st century, because I have an iPhone in my pocket. I mean, that's not, you had this aggressive country like Russia, which didn't leave the old pre-war thinking. I mean, the pre-war thinking stayed. It hasn't changed. They think essentially the same way as a European 19th century empire would. So we are where we are.
And how is Europe going to get back to this idea of hard power, tanks, missiles, guns, that sort of thing?
Well, I mean, I think we are fortunate that right now the presidency of the European Union is held by Poland, because the Polish presidency is talking about security for Europe. Security Europe is the slogan. And among other things, I even among people like us who follow these things, often people can't always say, well, what is the theme of this or the other country's presidency? Of course, this is on a rotating basis. It's only 6 months, and then it doesn't make you the generalissimo of the European Union, because that's not how the European Union works. But even then, the themes of a presidency weren't always clear. In the case of the Poles, it's very clear, and they've made exactly the right priority. And of course, I think they've divided up the thinking of security in 7 different areas, and one of the first areas is defense, and that's absolutely the right call. And they came up with this way. I mean, this was, of course, created during the fall, right? This is not something that is, it's not a reaction to what we see right now. This has been thought through as well. So I think that's it's a very fortunate development.
Critics of the EU have often missed the point that it's essentially been successful in creating this idea of the war between the European nations is almost inconceivable. And what has that led to a softening, the build-up of the welfare state, has that led to a softening in the way that we think about war and the world?
Yes, unfortunately, I think it's been, we've come to a point where it's often like, well, oh no, war is such a disaster, let's make the disaster go away as quickly as possible. Well, yeah, but that doesn't solve the problem. Like, often wars, I mean, as Clausewitz said, it's just politics with other means. If you want to actually end the war, I mean, there's a reason why the word peace and the word ceasefire is not the same word. Right? Ceasefire is just people stop shooting at each other. And often there's this gut reaction among Europeans, not just Europeans, many people in the US for that matter. It's just like, ceasefire, we need to stop shooting. It's like, yeah, but does that actually solve anything? I mean, you do have to, in the case of every war, you do have to look at the underlying causes for the war if you actually want to solve it. I mean, the reason why we understood that the underlying cause of World War II was the Nazis, so you had to remove them. A peace treaty with Nazi Germany after, say, I don't know, a couple of years of fighting would not have solved anything. We would have just had more war a couple of years later. That's plain and obvious.
There were voices that actually advocated some form of surrender to the Nazis in the early days.
Yes, and again, that's understandable because, Neville Chamberlain often gets vilified, but he was an honorable man and someone who had the remembered World War I, as many people. I mean, this was fairly shortly afterwards. So it's natural, but again, you do have to sometimes, you can't just rely on what has been before. You do have to think outside the box if you have to think strategically. And there were plenty of people then, Churchill among others, who did. And again, it's a natural thing to be repulsed by war and wanting to solve things around the table and talking and all that. That's great, but it doesn't work with everybody, right? For example, one thing that Westerners, Europeans, again, Americans as well, often miss about Russia is that, we have this idea that, okay, this is war, right? That's when people are shooting, that's bad. Here is peace talks sitting around the table, that's good. Well, that's not how the Russians see it. For them, it's just war by other means. It's war all the time. It's just another way of doing it. If they think they can achieve their goals that way, they'll do it.
What's necessary? We live in a very comfortable Europe. Western Europe is very comfortable. Obviously, it's got these external threats. What does Europe, the EU especially, need to do to build up its security on the economic front? Is it accurate to say that the European Union is overregulated? It's kind of in a kind of almost a stagnatory form of government. Is that true, or can it break out from? Well, I mean, if it is true.
Well, when we say that America innovates, China steals, Europe regulates, or whatever. I mean, there's some truth to that. There's a reason why this is often being said. Yes, there is overregulation in the European Union, but of course, I mean, it's one thing with the regulation in the States, but also the European Union is a pretty unique experiment, right? It's not a union like the United States.
Yes.
Americans often say, well, you're doing the Articles of Confederation. We tried that a few years and it didn't work, so we changed it. It's like, yes, but Europe is not the United States. I mean, these are countries that have centuries of history that are very different. It's not
of history of fighting each other.
Yeah, exactly, and it's not going to be one United States. I mean, it shouldn't be, because the American model doesn't fit the European Union. That being said, I mean, of course you can do. There are ways to handle competitiveness and make Europe more innovative. I mean, we have a lot of these things are outlined in the Mario Draghi report. Again, like Mario Draghi has been around for some time. You would think that maybe this could have been addressed earlier, but again,
is that something that can be decreed by this form of liberalisation by decree? We must be more competitive, we must be more innovative. Can that be done from the top down?
Well, there are certain things that can be done for sure. I mean, again, it's the report outlines, and there are certain ways to do it. I mean, of course, we have these institutions, we have the Commission, we have the Parliament, and the Council of Ministers to be able to do these things. There are going to be several events in Poland that will focus on economic competitiveness. And so, I mean, obviously, a lot of that has to also do with the European countries, the national governments themselves, and on that field, they differ a lot. There are some countries who are innovative, and there's some are less so.
You mentioned, as we draw on to the end of our discussion, you mentioned the British Prime Minister, the French President has already gone to see President Trump, the Polish President has seen him for a brief period. Is this something that the EU can do, or is it better to continue this bilateral kind of negotiation?
Well,
what's your take
there's
on
a
that?
place for everybody. I mean, and again, like this obsession that Americans sometimes have, right? Like, who do I call when I call Europe? They're going to say, well, you don't. That's the point. Again, you don't call one person. It's not going to be that way. So, I mean, here the Commissioner Ursula von der Leyen she said some good things. There's a good communication from there. We have this Commissioner of, the Defense Commissioner Kubilius. Again, great idea. And at the same time, some countries could also form. You don't need total unity among everyone. You're not always going to get it. You can form a coalition of willing, if you want to call it that, to drive particularly the matter of security forward.
Yes, I mean, before we had the Club Med, the so-called Club Med nations, who focused on the Mediterranean and the near Atlantic, and the Eastern Europeans focus on that. So it's not, as you say, it's not this unitary, monolithic.
No, but also we see that in terms of geography. I mean, take the Central Eastern European countries. There's the V4 for a long time, coordinate. It's like, yes, however, there are clear. I mean, it's 4 countries, and there are pretty clear divisions between them as far as that's concerned. Fans of the V4 will often say, like, well, look at this. If all those 4 countries would work to such a powerhouse, yeah, but they differ. So they're supposed to unite to what end? I would love greater unity among the V4, but there has to be some sort of idea behind that of what it is you're doing. I think the Poles happen to have gotten it right. There are other countries in the V4, let's put it diplomatically, not so much, but that's another.
Yes, that makes it a bit more complicated when there are about 27 of us to always.
But you can also look at the Poles are reaching out to the Nordic Baltic states. After all, yes, Poland is a Central European country, but it's also a Baltic country.
Historically, it's always been connected over the Baltic. Aaron Korewa, thank you very much for coming to the programme. Great to listen to your intake.
Thank you so much.
That's all we have time for today. Join us again. We have a new time from March, Tuesdays 21:35, so that's 35 minutes past 9 CET. Join us then.